Welcome to the Dollars and Hops podcast, where we help you optimize your financial future. Here are your hosts, Scott and Lance.
Welcome to the Dollars and Hops podcast. I am Lance, your host, along here with my co-host Scott up in Maryland, and we are so excited you're here to join us for our third episode ever. And Scott, how are you doing, man? How are things going?
I'm doing well, Lance. I'm excited to drink a pumpkin beer with you this evening and also talk about the financial playbook. This is really what we're going to utilize to start the discussion around how you should prioritize your personal finances. So this is going to be a good framework for our listeners as they think about how to deploy the money that they're earning. And we hope that people think about where their money is going and what they should be doing with it next to optimize their net worth.
Yeah, I love that, Scott. I think it comes at a perfect time, right? Coming off of our last episode, we've had a couple weeks now off the monthly budget episode. And now, hopefully, if we did our monthly budgets correctly, we had that little bit of extra at the end of the month after all your living and giving is gone. And hey, what do we do with that money, right? Like, what's the plan for that money? This is what we're going to talk about, where that money should be going, how to work through the financial ladder or the financial playbook that Scott and I have kind of gone back and forth on and argued over and kind of hammered out something that we feel like can be helpful for all of us, anyone who's listening, wherever you are on this financial journey.
Yep. So before we get to that, let's get to the hops portion of the podcast. For those of you that don't know, Lance and I will drink a craft brew during every single episode, and we have a head-to-head face-off at the very end. It's a way for us to have a little bit of fun while we're recording this podcast, and also for those craft beer lovers to get an idea of maybe what they should pick up next at the liquor store. Lance, what are you sipping on tonight?
Yeah, so I had been keeping it local up until now, and I just couldn't help myself but to go all the way out to the West Coast, to Seattle, Washington, to our friends over at Elysium Brewing. Literally has become one of my favorite breweries across the whole country as they've started selling their different varieties of beers here in South Carolina, here in Charleston. And I am going to be sampling, it's October, the weather's changing. We've got pumpkins out on the front porches, and I'm going to go with the Night Owl Pumpkin Ale for this episode. And I am very excited to get on my fall spirit and give this one a taste.
Perfect. And keeping in spirit, I'll also be drinking a pumpkin ale. This one's going to be from Evolution Craft Brewing out in Salisbury, Maryland, so I'll keep it local. I'll be drinking the Jack-o'-lantern Pumpkin Ale, and looking forward to it. With that
was a great pronunciation on that. I'm reading what and I'm like, wow, that was a fantastic pronunciation.
I don't know if it was or not.
It really was.
We'll go with it.
It really was.
I was thinking about it before I said it.
Yeah. So before we kind of get going on the financial playbook, we do have a headline this week that I think Scott found for us, and he's going to dive into it. Scott, what'd you find, buddy?
Yeah, so I pulled this one off of CNBC. This is, the headline reads, "Near zero interest rates may be needed for up to 3 years," says Dallas Fed's Robert Kaplan. Basically, Robert Kaplan is quoted as saying that interest rates are going to need to be anchored around zero for 3 years or so to aid the U.S. economic recovery from the coronavirus pandemic. I think this has two main takeaways after reading this article. I mean, obviously, with interest rates really low, that means that you're going to have extremely low mortgage rates. So if you haven't refinanced any of your home loans, or even if you have longer like car loans, you could consider refinancing into a lower rate. I'm looking now at my credit union, and we have 30-year fixed rate mortgages at 3%, 20-year fixed rate mortgages at 2.875%, 15-year fixed rate mortgages at 2.375. There's absolutely no reason to get anything but a fixed rate mortgage in these times. And I think that we'll all look back at this. I know we've been saying this for probably years at this point, that interest rates won't be this low forever. At some point, that has to be true. Interest rates will probably rise over time. So to be able to lock in your mortgage rate at a 30-year fixed rate at 3% is something that is, you'll probably look back on, 10, 15 years from now, and you'd be pretty happy if you did that. So I would encourage all of our listeners to take a look at their mortgage rates now and see if it might make sense to refinance. If maybe you bought your home a couple of years ago, your interest rate was likely much higher.
So that's the good news, Scott. The other thing that I've noticed here that I see in your notes is, I've noticed in my own savings account, my online savings account that's supposed to be quote unquote high yield savings account, I have noticed that the interest rate on that savings account has dropped.
They're not so high yield anymore.
Right, exactly.
It's not, yeah. I get an email from Ally Bank, I think every couple weeks, and they're telling me about how they're lowering the interest rate again.
Right. Yeah. So talk to us a little bit about that. That's the flip side of the coin, right?
Yeah. So obviously with low rates comes low savings interest rates that you can earn. So at least from Ally and most of the online savings banks out there, most of them are lowering their interest rates every month, 2 months. So you'll probably see that. You can use bankrate.com to shop your interest rate, your online savings rate. I would definitely encourage our listeners to do that as the rates just keep dropping. So you want to definitely take note of that and see which online banks are offering the highest interest.
That's great. Well, that's good info to have. Scott, thanks for finding that article. We will have that posted in our show notes, so go check it out for yourself. But yes, definitely interest rates very low for refinancing or purchasing a home. And then at the same time, unfortunately, the savings rate's kind of decreasing over time, but it's a double-sided coin. So what we want to do this episode, as we talked about, was introducing our Dollars and Hops financial playbook, our framework for how we think about saving and building wealth over time. And before we kind of get into it, we just wanted to go ahead and say there's no way we are going to be able to squeeze this all into one episode. We would be doing this topic, as important as it is, complete injustice. And so we're planning on making this a 2-part episode. We'll see how it goes. But I want to turn it over to Scott for a minute. Scott, what do we mean when we say financial playbook? Why don't you go ahead and explain that?
Sure. So the way I think about this is, you have, obviously everybody's got their income and they got their job and they're earning money, and people don't often know what's the best thing to do with that money. What do I mean by that? You might have debt. You might not have a lot of savings. You might wonder, is it better to save money for an emergency fund, or is it better to pay off my student loans? Is it better to save in my IRA? Or is it better to save for my child's college education? This is our way of trying to decipher that for you, as far as what we think makes the most sense, as far as where you should be putting your money and where you should be putting it first. So we've kind of broken it down into 5 different steps. As Lance said, we're not going to get into all 5 steps on this episode, or this will be a 2-part. So this episode, we're going to have the first 2 steps, and then the next episode you'll have to tune in for the final 3 steps. But we think that this is a good hierarchy for how you should prioritize your income, what's coming in, and what you should be doing with that money.
Yeah, well said. And it's super important that we actually have a plan that we're following with that extra money, so that it doesn't just slip through our fingers and we end up spending it on something we weren't really planning on spending it, just because we had it lying around and we didn't have a good plan for it. I think that's really important. Another way to talk about this subject is order of operations. You might hear that term thrown around. There's all kinds of different plans out there. This is by no means the only one out there. And there's other great plans out there too. This is not going to be the only one you should ever follow. And we're going to talk about that a little bit as well. But we do think, we are biased. These are the steps that we came up with, because this is kind of, for the most part, how we live our lives, financially speaking, and how we think about our finances. And it's worked out well for us so far, and we'd love to share it. So yeah, Scott, what you got?
So we'll get right into it. The first step that we have here is the emergency fund. We feel like that is priority number 1, is establishing an emergency fund. of 3 to 6 months of your ongoing expenses. The reason we feel like this is important is it's your safety net. So if you were to lose a job, or you had a drop in income, or you had an unfortunate event where a family member maybe gets sick and you have to take some time off of work, and your income is disrupted in some way, it is extremely important, obviously, to not get behind on all those bills and daily life expenses. It's extremely important to have a safety net of, at least 3 to 6 months of expenses to be able to provide you that cushion if something were to happen. A good place to kind of keep this money is just in an online savings account. And the reason I say that is because you have no idea when this unexpected event could occur where you might actually need the money.
Right,
so,
right.
I'd keep my.
You don't usually forecast emergencies. That's the whole nature of an emergency, right? It comes out of nowhere.
Exactly. I mean, if you listen to our budget episode, I went through my crazy, tedious process of online savings accounts where I try to save for all the unforeseen things that could happen in life. But ultimately, we all of us are going to have those events in life that we didn't plan for. This is that fund that you want to have to kind of give you that sense of security. And it's really something that you want to do before you start paying down debt or saving for a house or anything else. You really want to have this safety net. It's going to give you that level of freedom and comfort, just knowing that you have that money there if you need it.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. Scott, how do I know what 3 to 6 months of living expenses is for my household? How do I even know what number that is?
Yes. So if you have not listened to episode number 2, I would highly encourage you to do so. That's where we did the monthly budget. We would definitely encourage all of our listeners to do a monthly budget so that you have an idea of what your expenses are. I mean, really go line by line for at least a couple of months to get an idea of what you spend on a monthly basis. Do it at least 2, maybe 3 months. That'll give you a good idea of what you average. That should kind of be the starting point. And we left it pretty open-ended with 3 to 6 months. And we did that kind of for a reason. I think that there's certain people that might be more established in a job than others. And I feel like there's certain people that might only need 3 months of emergency fund because they're in a fast growing industry or in a career that's in high demand. There's definitely certain people that would be able to get a job very quickly if they lost their job. And then there's certain careers where it might be a couple of months before they get another job, or maybe even 3 to 6 months down the line. So this is really a personal thing as to how much you want to put in there, 3, 4, 5, 6 months. But this is kind of, just a framework.
Yeah. And I think one thing I found when doing this exercise really for the first time, and it does go back to the monthly budget episode, just like you said, but really by doing a monthly budget, it gave me a level of confidence by seeing it laid out that, oh, this is what it costs to run my household for a month, to live the way that I'm living, without drastically reducing anything, without reducing my giving, without reducing my grocery budget, my eating out budget, just kind of like, here's what it costs to run my household, multiply out by 3 or 6, 5 months, whatever. You have a high level confidence knowing that that's an adequate emergency fund. It really is. If you're saving more than that and you don't have another reason that you're saving that money, like for a house purchase or for other expenses you have coming up, then really what we're going to tell you is we're going to have other plans for that money that's above and beyond your emergency fund. And if it's maybe just 1 month of what your actual living expenses are, we're going to go ahead and tell you that, hey, you need to beef that up a little bit. You're living a little bit too close to the line there. We would really like to see you closer to the 3 to 6 month time frame for your emergency fund.
And ultimately, you'll sleep better at night if you got 3 to 6 months. You'll sleep very good at night rather than being month to month on your budget. You got to find a way to carry some extra money at the end of each month so that you can save it. And establishing this emergency fund is extremely important. With that, I think we'll get to step number 2, which is paying off all high interest debt.
Yeah, this is an interesting one. And I think this is where we're going to start to differ from some of the other plans that you might see out there that are more popular. There are some great plans available, namely Dave Ramsey's plan for getting out of debt. And many people listening to this, I'm sure, because of how popular it is, maybe have even gone through it and had success with it. And that's awesome. If you've had success paying off debt through another plan, that's fantastic. But if you're coming to this podcast and you're looking for an answer, and you're looking for, well, what are these guys doing with it? This is how we think about debt. And there's a couple reasons for it. But again, step 2 being pay off all high interest debt. And high interest debt is a subjective term. So what do we mean by high interest, Scott?
Yeah. So for us, we're going to kind of describe this as anything over about 5 to 6%. It's hard to say exactly what is high interest rate. Obviously, anything over 10 is extremely high. In today's world, 5 to 6% is actually pretty high. I mean, going back to that headline that I read earlier in the episode, mortgage rates for 30 years are 3%. So if you start getting in the 5 to 6% range, we're going to start calling that higher interest rate debt. So there's kind of 2 main ways to tackle this debt. We think that it's important to pay this down, obviously, as quickly as possible, because it's going to be.
I don't like debt.
Yeah, I don't like debt either.
I don't like debt.
I think that there's definitely certain debts that are much worse than others. If you start talking about a mortgage that's a 3% interest rate over 30 years, that's debt, and we don't like debt, but there's much worse debt out there. We're talking about tackling the bad debt.
The reason for that's a great point you bring up. The reason for that is because a house is almost always an appreciating asset.
Certainly.
So you have a low interest loan typically on an asset class that is going to increase over time and provide value. And one day you'll probably sell that house. When you sell that house, it's going to bring back more value than what you paid for it. And hopefully you finance that with a very low interest rate loan.
Certainly. Yeah. And you really need to prioritize, the things like credit cards and your high interest car loans. And maybe you have a private student loan. A lot of those carry very high interest rates. It's going to be hard to out earn the interest rate in an investment account. I mean, the stock market might earn, between 8 and 10% a year. If you've got a debt that's at 7%, by paying down that debt, you're getting a guaranteed 7%. So you might want to give up that extra additional money that you think you can earn in investments just to pay down that debt. So there's kind of 2 main ways that the financial community's kind of come up with as to how to tackle debt. The first being the debt snowball. Lance, you want to talk about the debt snowball?
Yeah. So the debt snowball, again, this is straight from Dave Ramsey. So we have to give him and his team credit. When we talk about personal finance, this is what's interesting. There is a math portion and there is a psychology portion, or a heart, or determination, or will, or discipline. I will call that all like the mental component, the psychology component of personal finance. And so, you'll run into some people who are like, it's 20% math and 80% psychology, or because the human being is the one who's driving the behaviors, that's really about the math. And I agree, it is more about psychology than math. I'm not sure exactly what the ratio is, but debt snowball really plays off that idea that we're not going to take just the highest interest loan debt first. We're going to take the smallest debt first in dollar amount. So
it's all about getting those milestones.
It's all about hitting the milestones and getting those dopamine hits as you clip one off, the smallest one first. That's the easiest low-hanging fruit. As you clip it off, boom, you're like, man, I can do this. On to the next one. Clip that one off and boom, man, I can do this. And I think this is a huge reason why so many people have had success paying off all of their debt using the Dave Ramsey method, the debt snowball. It's great. It's a great method. It does work.
Certainly. And I totally see that. I think that those, like you said, the dopamine hits are sometimes the most powerful thing that we have in our arsenal is being able to see, okay, I can list out my debts. I might have, 3 or 4, and maybe I'm starting with a $300 debt, and just being able to cross that off the list is sometimes just psychologically all you need to really motivate yourself. There's another approach. It's called the debt avalanche. This is for the math nerds. So we're not saying one way is right, one way is wrong. Debt avalanche is the quickest way to get out of debt. Debt snowball is, from a psychological standpoint, the best way. And it gives you those milestones and those dopamine hits, as Lance was saying. But debt avalanche is the fastest way to get out of debt. That is by prioritizing your debts by interest rate. So let's say you got a student loan that's at 12%. It's a private student loan, 12%. Then you got a car loan that's at 9%. Then you got, a high interest car loan at 7%. You would tackle the highest interest rate first, regardless of the balance that's owed on that loan, because that's going to be, from a mathematical standpoint, the fastest way to pay down the debt. So you might start with,
or the lowest cost way, maybe is a way to say that.
The lowest cost way to pay down the debt.
Right.
So you might start with the debt that actually has the highest balance. And sometimes that can be a little disconcerting from a psychological standpoint, because it takes a very long time to pay off that debt. But it's the lowest cost way to get out of debt. And it's the fastest way to get out of debt.
Yeah. I love this discussion because I think I want to debate you a little bit on this. And I think I have to disagree, only that the fastest way to get out of debt might still be the debt snowball. Here's why. The amount of time it would take you to get out of debt really determines on what your income is and how much money you can be putting towards it. And if you're the person who's behind the wheel, who's driving the car of how much money you can make, and you are more determined every time you clip off a debt, your income is going to go up and you're going to clip off debts even faster. Now, it still might be a higher cost, right? And I think you're correct that it will be a lower.
So you're saying from cash flow perspective, you're getting more cash flow because you're paying off that first debt. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, that's right. You get more cash flow, but also you get the determination, like, holy cow, I can do this. And I'm going to dig deeper than I would if I was just working on one massive debt that everybody's situation is different. But if you did have one massive debt at a higher interest rate and you're just plugging along at it just month after month, and you just feel like you're not getting traction, I could see how people might, like a diet, just kind of give up or just not dig as deep as you would if you really saw the progress, clipping debt off after debt off after debt off. And so,
see, Lance, this is where you're wrong. I'm just gonna tell you, this is where you're wrong. So the debt avalanche is definitely better, and the reason
we can tell
is
you're
because
the nerd. You're the nerd of the group.
I am the math nerd, but episode number 1, net worth tracker.
Sure.
If you are tracking your net worth, you are seeing the progress every single month.
That's great. That's a great point. Agreed.
So
agreed.
I get the dopamine hits, but you're going to get it on the net worth tracker. If you don't do the net worth tracker, maybe the debt snowball is the best option. So
final point on this to make too is the difference in time, right, that we're talking about, honestly, and we're talking about interest rates over time, over years. The amount of time it would take you to pay off the debt total, the difference in time is negligible. So the actual cost we're talking about, if we're talking about 12% versus 8% versus the 3%, and the amount of actual dollars that you might save, even though it is lower cost to go debt avalanche, I think it might not be as much as we might make it out to be.
Certainly. And I think it depends on the individual situation.
It does.
There's no doubt about it.
Agreed.
And I
Absolutely.
think that from a high level, when we're talking about this, the monthly budget is core and key. You need to have your monthly budget down. You need to know exactly what you're dropping to the bottom. What is extra? That extra money is what we're applying to the debt snowball or the debt avalanche.
Right on.
And it's really just a simple system where once you've paid off that top debt, whichever method you use, you're taking all that extra money and you're applying it to the next highest interest rate debt, or in the case of the debt snowball, the next debt that has the lowest balance, so that you're getting those dopamine hits. You have to have the cash flow. That's the key to making this work.
That's great. And I think, you heard Scott talk about it as how you're going to sleep at night once you have your emergency fund in place and a confidence level that, man, this really does cover me and my family for 5 months if something catastrophic were to happen. I think in the same way, when you pay off debt, when you pay off all of your high interest debt, all of your debt, maybe except the house, and you get to that position, you're going to sleep better at night. You're going to maximize your cash flow.
There's no doubt
and,
about it.
And we're going to get to some really cool points in our financial playbook, what comes next after that. But one thing we wanted to bring up about the low interest debt, Scott, why don't you take this?
So low interest debt, this is something that we believe you don't pay off until you kind of progress through the rest of the steps. So we talked about having an emergency fund, obviously 3 to 6 months, then paying off high interest rate debt. After that, the low interest rate debt that's left, your 3% mortgage, your 2.5% car loan or 0% car loan, don't pay that off yet. Go to the next step before you pay off those low interest rate debts. Those are very, I mean, most of the time, I mean, if we're talking about a house, we're talking about an appreciating asset. If we're talking about a car, it's a depreciating asset, but it's still at a super low rate. And you really shouldn't be taking additional cash flow and putting it towards really low interest rate debt.
Well said, Scott. I mean, that's exciting. I love the fact that we're getting these points out for our listeners to hear and to actually put a game plan, a financial playbook down on paper for a plan for their money. Hey, next we have questions that need some answers. And so I'm going to go ahead and ask Scott this question because he's got some personal experience with it. We actually had a question from one of our longtime listeners, Jay, in Charleston, asking us what's the difference.
Long time with third episode, but that's okay.
He goes back to the very beginning of Dollars and Hops. I mean, the very beginning. He got in on the ground floor on this thing. We got to give him props. What's the difference between a SEP, an SEP, a SEP, and a Roth IRA? What's the difference, Scott?
Certainly. So I didn't know this until my wife started a business a few years ago. I had to research this on my own. So a SEP is a simplified employee pension. This is it's a retirement plan for businesses with few or no employees. The key advantages to a SEP is that you can put in up to $57,000 in your SEP account in 2020. It maxes out at 25% of your total compensation. It's incredibly powerful to be able to put $57,000 in a retirement account. Most of us normal people are capped out at around $20,000 in our 401k and maybe $6,000 in our IRA. So that is a main difference between a SEP and a IRA. I think that Congress realized that small business owners can definitely have varying income year over year and
higher risk.
Yeah. So their income might be super high one year and really low another year. And I think that's why they made the contribution limits so high. Being able to store away $57,000 in a retirement account is incredibly powerful. On the other side, a Roth IRA, this is a retirement plan that pretty much anyone with earned income can contribute to up to certain income limits, but you're allowed to contribute up to 100% of your income, up to $6,000 or $7,000 if you're 50 or older. The cool part about a Roth is the withdrawal in retirement is tax-free. So the money you earn within the accounts does not get taxed at retirement. So every dollar that you see in your Roth is a dollar that you can spend in retirement without Uncle Sam getting their hands on it.
That's big. So I think our listeners may or may not know this, but anytime you hear Roth IRA, Roth 401k, Roth anything, Roth means tax-free growth. It's huge. And it has huge implications for the longer amount of time that you leave it in the market to grow over time with compound interest. That if you actually choose to go the Roth route, it has more and more power the more that it compound grows over time, tax-free.
Our next question comes from an anonymous listener. The question is, do you have any advice for dinks, dual income with no kids transitioning into a single income with kids household? How can you prepare for this transition? Lance, you want to tackle that one?
Yeah, I think first of all, it's a timely question for this episode, right? So work the financial playbook for sure. Hey, first of all, do you have an emergency fund that's 3 to 6 months? If you do, great. Let's go to the next step. Hey, have you started paying off your high interest debt? If you haven't, let's get that paid off. Let's get it paid off as quick as possible, whichever method you feel more comfortable with. Debt snowball, debt avalanche.
Next piece of this, I would say, is to definitely have a monthly budget and maybe even consider living on one income before you actually have to live on one income. See what it's like to take that additional income and save all of it. Put it all in an account. Act like you don't have it. Do a monthly budget. See if you can make it work. If you can't, now's the time to take a look at that monthly budget, see where you can cut to make life easier once you do have a child. And I got news for you. If you have a child, your expenses aren't going to go down. They're only going to go up.
That's not true. Of course, I'm kidding. It is very true. It's going to go way up. Yeah, that's a great point. And also, whether you're having kids through a pregnancy, biologically, or through adoption, there's going to be expenses, right? There's going to be expenses in hospital visits and delivery, or through adoption or fostering. There's just more expenses in the house. So I think Scott's a great idea. And with that, we're going to go moving into the Hops Showdown section of our podcast. Scott, what are you going to rate your Evolution Craft Brewing pumpkin ale?
Yeah. So again, this is Jack-O-Lantern Pumpkin Ale from Evolution Craft Brewing out of Salisbury, Maryland. Definitely a great pumpkin ale. First one I've had all year, but I would definitely give it a very high score of an 88.
Nice. Very nice. Okay, for Elysium Brewing out of Seattle, Washington, this is the Night Owl Pumpkin Ale. Got a beautiful shot of a large, wide-eyed owl. You'll see it on our Instagram at Dollars and Hops. Give us a follow there to follow all of our beer selections and craft brew ratings. I'm going to have to go ahead. This was actually an excellent pumpkin ale, and I love pumpkin ales. It's not for everybody, but I really do. And something about fall weather, something about having a hint of pumpkin, but it definitely had a little bit of like allspice, nutmeg, maybe even a little bit of cinnamon in there, but just a little bit of spiciness. It was excellent. I'm going to give it a 92. And so, it was delicious. I enjoyed it. And I think this is the winner this week. So Night Owl Pumpkin Ale for the win.
Awesome. And with that, we're going to leave you with our action step. Do you have an emergency fund? If not, think about funding one. 3 to 6 months. Have you looked at your debt? Have you kind of prioritized that debt? Have you figured out how you want to tackle that debt? Maybe the debt snowball is the right move for you. Maybe the debt avalanche. If you're the math guy, the debt avalanche. If you're the psychological guy, you like those small little dopamine hits, the debt snowball is for you. Consider tackling that debt using either the debt snowball or the debt avalanche to pay down your high interest rate debt as quickly as possible. Obviously, tune in to our second part of this episode where we're going to talk about the 3 additional steps in our financial playbook.
This is Lance.
This is Scott.
Live and give on less than you make and invest the difference. Dollars and Hops out.
You have been listening to the Dollars and Hops podcast. Optimizing your financial future starts with taking action today. Got a question? Shoot us an email at questions@dollarsandhops.com, and the guys will tackle it on a future episode. Visit our website, dollarsandhops.com, for show notes and the craft brew lineup for each episode. And please, leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or Stitcher. Thanks for listening.